Okay, so in this video, we're going to take what we learned and observed from our bounce ball observation. So watching the ball bounce in real life or watching the video and talking about some observations that we made there. And we're going to apply that directly to what's called a motion guide. A motion guide is in our case, a piece of paper that shows the motion that an object is going to take over the course of the animation. In this case, the object that we're doing is a bouncing ball. So this is going to show the motion of that ball as it moves along the path. We never animate this. We use it as a background reference, and what we do is plot the timing on it, and then we set sheets of paper over top of it to do the actual animation part. This is just a background reference to things, and will help us get things set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a ground plane, and I can put that wherever I want, but that's where the ball is going to be bouncing at. So just a straight line across there. You can draw things in lightly to begin with, and then make them darker as you go. So if you're like me and you're a sketchy drawer, you can sketch it in really light and then go back and push it darker. I'm using an animation pencil. You could do this with a blue animation pencil, a red animation pencil, a mechanical pencil. It really doesn't matter at this point, but I like using the animation pencils. You want to make sure that when you're drawing this, you keep the holes, the punched holes, at the bottom of your paper. That's going to be how we put it on the light table. That's also how we keep our drawings registered. Registered means that they are lined up with each other, so that when we go to animate it, it doesn't look like the ball is here and then it jumps over here for some reason. So having them all line up with those pegs at the bottom keeps the animation registered. So now what I'm going to do, based on my observations, is I'm going to make the path that ball takes. I'm going to start from a height. I don't want it to just bounce from the ground, but I'm going to start like as if I've thrown it from high and it's going down from there. So somewhere along kind of near the top of my paper, I'm going to start by doing an arch. Remember, we observed that the ball makes a path that looks like a wave, an up and down wave, or like mountains like you used to draw when you were in grade school. So I'm going to start by making that. And I want my animation here to have about 4 or 5 different bounces. So I don't want it to go way over the middle of my page, but maybe about 1/4 of the way over, 1/3 of the way over. And again, if you're like me, you can sketch it in really lightly and then come back and alter it or push it in darker later. So that's my first bounce. That's the first ball kind of hanging in midair and it's dropping down. That's what it's going to do first. Now I need it to bounce into the second bounce. We also observed that the ball on the second bounce and subsequent bounces is less high than the previous bounce. We thought that it was about half as high to 3/4 as high, somewhere in between there. So somewhere in between about half of this length to 3/4 of that, I'm going to go about right here. I'm going to draw a light dashed line that goes straight over, or as straight as I can make it. I'm eyeballing it so it doesn't have to be perfect. So now I know that my next bounce can't be any taller than this line that I just drew, because we observed that the height of the previous bounces is not as tall as the bounce before it. Now I need to know how far distance I need to make. So this is half of a bounce. So the rest of that bounce is going to go way out over here somewhere off the screen or off the page. So I know that, or we observed that the distance between each bounce is about 1/2 and 3/4. So if this is half of my bounce, I'm going to add a little bit to it. And then I'm going to mark using my pencil as a kind of ruler or a marking tool. I'm going to mark on my page about how far, so this is how far or distance that bounce should be. It's a little over half the size of the distance of my first bounce. So I put that on my paper, on my ground plane line. I'm going to make just a little mark where that ends. So that's going to be the distance of this next bounce. So when I sketch this in, I want to have that, again, arc shape where it comes to the top, right at that dotted line. Can't go any higher than that. And it's got that smooth curved edge. It's not too flat across the top, but it has a nice kind of wave or mountain shape to it. And it's going to come and bounce down right there. So I started up high, it came down, it hit. It's went into the second bounce. That's not as high or as wide as distance as that first bounce. And I'm going to continue now with the next bounce. So at the third bounce, the same thing is going to happen. It's not going to be as tall as the second bounce. So about here is half. I'm going to go a little bit above half to about right there. And I'm going to draw a nice, trying to be nice horizontal across with a dashed line. So again, my bounce on this one can't be any taller than that line I just drew in. And then I'm going to add in the distance. So if the distance for the second bounce was from here to here, I'm going to mark using my pencil as a measuring tool. I've got the end of the pencil at one side of that bounce, and I'm marking or holding with my finger the other end of that bounce, and I'm going to move that over. So that's a whole bounce. I don't want that. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to mark it at about 1/2 or 3/4. So if this is about half of that bounce, I'm going to go a little bit wider. So I'm going to mark right there. Now with my hand cut there, I'm going to go to the end of that second bounce, leave my finger on the other side, and make a little mark here. So the distance now between this bounce is about 3/4 of the previous bounce. So the third bounce is 3/4 distance smaller than the second bounce. So when I draw in this next wave or arc shape, again, the height is going to go right up to that line, not exceed it, and I don't want it to be a flat. I want it to feel like it's nice and rounded, like a wave or like a mountain. And then it's going to come down and bounce down and have that distance. So I'm going to continue that for my fourth bounce. And I want to show at least 4 bounces. You can do more than that, but a minimum of 4. So again, the height here, this is about halfway. I'm going to go a little bit taller than halfway. I'm going to make that dotted line across there, a horizontal that represents how high my bounce ball can go, this next bounce. So I'm going to do the same thing for the distance. I'm going to put my pencil on one side of the arc, my finger on the other side, and then I'm going to move in so that it's, if this is half the distance of the bounce, I want to go a little bit over half, about 3/4 of that. Take that marking and then line my finger up with the end of the third bounce there. Hold my finger on the other side and make a little mark so that hopefully you can see that each time it bounces, it's not as high and it's not as wide, and there's not as much distance between each bounce. So this time when I draw this arc, it can't go any higher than that dashed line, and it can't go any wider than those 2 boundary marks that I made. And I'm going to do one more bounce before it exits the page here. So it's going to be about, again, 3/4 of the height. I'm going to draw a dashed line. I'm going to measure the distance again by lining up my pencil, sliding my finger in to about 3/4, moving that over towards the end of the fourth bounce here. Using my finger as a measuring tool, make a little mark there. And then drawing my last little bounce or arc or wave or mountain shape. And I might add just a little boop for it to go off of the page. So after I've got this done, my next step is to just push my lines darker so that I'm able to see them through the light table.